got just a glimpse of that upper window of the face of a little girl. And I don't know who lives here. It's a boy, right? But I saw the face of a little girl in that window just now.
The house sits quietly at the corner of North 2nd Street in Atchison, Kansas. To anyone passing by, it looks ordinary, maybe even charming. White paint, a small porch, a neat little yard. It's the kind of house you'd expect children to grow up in, the kind of house you'd imagine laughter echoing through on summer evenings. But to those who know its story, this house is anything but ordinary. It has earned a reputation that chills even the most seasoned investigators of the paranormal. They call it the Sallie House. And behind its walls lurk tales of violent scratches, phantom voices, and the shadowy figure of a little girl who appears at the foot of your bed in the darkest hours of the night. People who dare to enter say the house has a way of getting under your skin. First, it watches. Then, it plays. And if you stay too long, it hurts. Skeptics arrive with smirks on their faces, but they leave pale and shaken, their arms marked with scratches they can't explain. The story begins like a whisper in the dark, a sick child, a desperate doctor, and a death that should have been peaceful but instead left something unfinished, something restless. From that day forward, the house has been called cursed. Those who step inside often say they feel it immediately, the heaviness in the air, like invisible eyes pressing against the back of their necks. Some report children's toys moving on their own, or voices calling their names. Others have seen her, the girl they call Sallie, standing silently in the shadows, waiting. And yet, the most terrifying part isn't just the ghost of a child. It's the possibility that Sallie isn't what she seems. That something else, something darker, wears her image like a mask. This is not just a ghost story. It's a true story. And once you've heard it, you'll never look at an ordinary little house the same way again. At the heart of every haunting lies a story of loss, and the Sallie House is no exception. Its legend begins in the early 1900s, when the home was occupied by a physician who often treated patients in the front rooms. He was known in the small town of Atchison as a capable doctor, the kind of man people trusted with their lives. But one case would etch his home into infamy. A little girl, no more than 6 years old, was brought to him one night. She was doubled over in pain, clutching her stomach, screaming and begging for relief. Some say her name was Sallie. The doctor suspected appendicitis, and back then, surgery was a race against time. There was no modern equipment, no sterile operating rooms. Just the doctor, his instruments, and a desperate attempt to save her life. The story says he began too quickly. Some versions claim he grew impatient and started cutting before the anesthesia had taken hold. Sallie writhed, crying out in agony. Her small hands clawed at him, pleading for the pain to stop. But the cries faded. Her body went limp. And in that house, in that moment, a life ended too soon. No one knows if Sallie died from her illness or from the panic of the procedure itself. What we do know is this: many believe her spirit never left. Witnesses say her presence lingers, bound to the very place where her short life was stolen. Some say she is confused, searching for comfort. Others insist her rage lives on, directed at the living who dare to step into her domain. From this tragic beginning, the house's reputation began to grow. What should have been just another old Kansas home became something else entirely, a place where grief twisted into something darker, and where the restless spirit of a child might not be the only thing that walks the halls. By now, the Pickmans were living in constant fear. Every night felt like a battle, every morning brought new marks on Tony's body. The house no longer felt like a home, it felt like a predator, waiting for the right moment to strike. They talked often about leaving. Packing up, finding another place, abandoning the house that had turned their dream of family life into a nightmare. But something about the Sallie House seemed to hold them there, almost as if the house itself refused to let them go. When they did manage to spend nights away, at family or friends' homes, Tony still wasn't free. The scratches appeared even when he wasn't in the house. He described feeling watched wherever he went, a weight pressing down on him like chains dragging behind. It wasn't just a haunted location anymore. The haunting had attached itself to him. This disturbed investigators even more. If Sallie was just a ghost tied to the house, why was Tony suffering outside of it? Some began to argue that what they were dealing with wasn't a child's spirit at all, but something darker that had latched onto him. Debra recalled one chilling moment. They were visiting her mother, hoping for relief. As they sat in the living room, she looked over and saw Tony wince. A long, red scratch was carving itself across his forearm, right in front of her eyes. There was no denying it. Whatever Sallie was, she was with them. The house's influence also grew in their daily lives. Tony's mood swung violently. He was exhausted, paranoid, sometimes describing visions of shadows that darted around him, whispering his name. Debra admitted later that she feared not just for his safety, but for hers. It was as if he was becoming someone else, reshaped by the force tormenting him. The Pickmans finally realized what investigators had warned all along: Sallie wasn't just a spirit haunting the house. She was inside their lives now, and no matter where they went, she, or it, wasn't finished with them. For decades, the Sallie House stood quietly, passed from owner to owner. Some reported strange happenings, others stayed silent. But the story that brought the house into national infamy began in 1993, when Tony and Debra Pickman moved in. The young couple thought they had found the perfect home. It was modest but comfortable, a place where they could prepare for the birth of their first child. The house on North 2nd Street wasn't just a structure of wood and nails to them, it was the start of a future. At first, life inside seemed ordinary. But soon, subtle things began to unsettle them. Lights flickered for no reason. The temperature would drop suddenly in certain rooms, as though an unseen cloud passed through. Their dog began to growl at empty spaces, staring intently at corners where nothing stood. Debra brushed it off as quirks of an old house. Tony wasn't so sure. The unease crept into him, making him feel as though they were never alone. That sensation grew when toys belonging to their newborn child began to move. Not scattered or misplaced, but carefully arranged. One morning, they discovered stuffed animals lined up in a perfect circle in the nursery. No adult had touched them, and their infant son was far too small to do it himself. What began as curious incidents escalated quickly. Debra reported hearing voices when she was home alone. She felt watched, but not threatened. In fact, at times she believed the presence was protective, almost like a child fascinated by her role as a new mother. But for Tony, the feeling was far different. He began waking at night with the distinct sensation of being observed. Some nights, he swore he saw a shadow moving just out of sight. And then the scratches appeared, red, burning marks across his chest and arms. At first they were faint, but soon they grew deeper, angry. Whatever lived in the Sallie house had chosen its target. And Tony was at the center of it. At first, Tony tried to dismiss the scratches as accidents, maybe from brushing against furniture, or the family dog while playing. But the explanations didn't hold up. He would go to bed unmarked, only to wake hours later with fresh welts burning across his skin. Sometimes, Debra would witness them forming in real time, watching as thin red lines appeared as though drawn by invisible claws. The attacks didn't stop there. At night, Tony often woke gasping, pinned down by a crushing weight. He described the sensation of icy hands pressing into his chest, holding him still as he struggled to breathe. Shadows seemed to linger at the edges of their bedroom, darker than the darkness itself. Then came the night he saw her. Tony awoke suddenly, his eyes darting to the foot of the bed. There, illuminated faintly by the glow from the street lamp outside, stood a small figure. A girl. She couldn't have been older than 6. Dark hair framed her pale face, and she wore what looked like a simple dress, the kind a child might have worn decades ago. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She only stared. Frozen in fear, Tony tried to call out to Debra, but no sound left his throat. The figure lingered for what felt like hours, though it was only moments. Then, just as suddenly as she appeared, she was gone. The next morning, Tony told Debra what he had seen. She listened with a mix of fear and sorrow. She had felt a presence too, but never seen it so clearly. Unlike Tony, however, she didn't sense malice. She wondered if this was Sallie, the child from the house's tragic past, curious, perhaps even longing for a mother's comfort. But Tony wasn't convinced. Whatever it was, it seemed to hate him specifically. The scratches, the suffocation, the cold dread he felt whenever she was near, none of it felt like the innocent spirit of a lost child. And deep down, Tony began to fear the truth: if this was Sallie, she wasn't here to play. She was here to hurt. After the Pickmans left, the Sallie house didn't fade into obscurity. Instead, their terrifying experiences thrust it into the spotlight, making the little white house in Atchison one of the most notorious haunted locations in America. Word spread quickly through television specials, paranormal magazines, and eventually the internet. The Sallie house became a destination for ghost hunters, skeptics, and thrill-seekers alike. Tourists flocked to the property, some curious, others daring each other to last a night inside. The city of Atchison embraced its reputation, offering ghost tours that included the Sallie house as their centerpiece. Guests reported the same chilling sensations the Pickmans had described years before: sudden cold drafts, the feeling of being watched, and the sound of small footsteps on wooden floors. Some claimed to capture eerie voices on recorders, faint laughter or whispers that answered their questions in the dark. Professional paranormal investigators continue to visit, setting up cameras, thermal sensors, and spirit boxes. Many have left convinced that the house remains active. Shadows flit across walls, toys move on their own, and unexplained knocks answer direct questions. Some investigators leave with more than just recordings; they leave with scratches across their bodies, just as Tony once did. Yet the mystery remains divided. Some insist Sallie is real, the trapped spirit of a frightened child, bound forever to the place of her suffering. Others argue that what appears to be Sallie is nothing more than bait, a disguise used by something far more sinister. For the people of Atchison, the Sallie house is more than a legend. It's a living mystery, a place that refuses to settle quietly into history. Every year, new stories emerge, new witnesses step forward, and the debate continues. And through it all, the house still waits, quiet on North 2nd Street, its windows dark, its doors opening for anyone brave, or foolish, enough to enter. The longer the Pickmans stayed in the Sallie house, the more relentless the disturbances became. What began as flickering lights and mysterious scratches evolved into open displays of force, as if the unseen presence wanted to prove its control over the home. Objects began moving on their own. Debra would return to a room only to find furniture shifted slightly, or baby toys stacked in impossible patterns. Kitchen utensils clattered from drawers, falling to the floor without anyone touching them. Even candles, unlit for days, would suddenly flicker to life, their flames swaying though no breeze stirred. For Debra, the energy often felt curious, almost childlike, as if Sallie were testing boundaries, trying to interact. But for Tony, it was a different story. The activity around him was violent, angry. He felt constantly stalked, as though something followed his every move. And when it struck him alone. The scratches grew worse. Sometimes 3 deep gouges appeared across his chest, other times along his arms and back. They would burn, welt, and vanish hours later, only to return again the next night. At times, Debra would watch him tense in pain, his eyes wide as unseen claws raked across his skin. And it wasn't only his body under attack. His mind began to unravel. Tony grew irritable, short-tempered, prone to fits of anger he couldn't explain. Debra described him as if he were possessed by something, his personality changing inside the house. Friends noticed it too, the tension in his voice, the paranoia in his eyes. It was as if the Sallie House was feeding on him, breaking him down. Debra clung to the belief that Sallie was just a lonely spirit, desperate for attention. But Tony's torment suggested something darker, something that wasn't playing. And the more they tried to ignore it, the more the house fought back. By the time Tony's torment reached its peak, the Pickmans knew they couldn't face the house alone. Word of their haunting had begun to spread, catching the attention of paranormal investigators and psychics eager to uncover the truth behind the strange activity. The first teams arrived with equipment, tape recorders, cameras, and electromagnetic sensors. They set up in the nursery, the living room, and especially the basement, where the energy felt thickest. Almost immediately, things began to happen. Lights dimmed and surged without explanation. Batteries and equipment drained within minutes. Cold spots moved through rooms like invisible clouds. One investigator reported seeing a child-sized shadow dart across the hall, vanishing before he could shine a flashlight. Another claimed to hear a little girl's giggle echo faintly, though no children were present. Recordings captured strange voices, whispers, breaths, and even a single word, "Mommy." But the most chilling revelations came from the psychics. Several were invited into the house on separate occasions, each asked to give impressions without being told the story. Again and again, the same image emerged, a young girl named Sallie. They described her as 6 or 7 years old, with dark hair and wide eyes. Some claimed she had died in agony during surgery inside the home. Yet not all agreed she was what she appeared to be. One psychic warned Debra directly, "The child is only part of it. There is something else here, something much older and much darker. It hides behind her face." Others suggested Sallie's spirit had grown bitter, vengeful, lashing out especially at men. They pointed to Tony's injuries as evidence, saying Sallie despised him and wanted him gone. The investigations brought validation to the Pickmans' experiences, but also more fear. If multiple people could see, hear, and feel Sallie, then she was undeniably real. But if the darker warnings were true, then the family wasn't dealing with. Every haunted house has a heart, a place where its energy feels the strongest. In the Sallie House, that place was the basement. From the beginning, Tony and Debra felt uneasy about it. The air down there was heavier, colder, as though the walls themselves absorbed and held the fear of everyone who entered. Investigators noticed it too. Electronic equipment would fail more often in the basement, batteries drained instantly, and strange malfunctions plagued recordings. During one session, an investigator placed a camera at the base of the stairs. Reviewing the footage later, they were stunned to see what looked like a shadow, tall, broad, and distinctly not childlike, moving across the frame. Whatever it wasn't the spirit of a little girl. Psychics confirmed their fears. While Sallie's energy seemed to linger in the upstairs rooms, the basement carried something else entirely. Dark, oppressive, watching. One psychic described it as a parasitic force, using the image of a little girl to gain trust, to lure people in, only to strike once they let their guard down. Tony's experiences seemed to support this theory. Though he sometimes saw the figure of the girl, more often he felt something much larger, towering over him. At times, he swore he heard a deep growl reverberating through the floorboards, a sound no child could make. The house's history fueled speculation. If Sallie's tragic death was real, perhaps she was only one part of the story. Perhaps the basement, with its cold corners and hidden spaces, had drawn something else long ago, something that fed on pain, anger, and fear. The investigators left shaken. Some refused to return, convinced they were not facing a child's ghost but a darker entity masquerading as one. They warned the Pickmans, "You aren't dealing with Sallie alone. You're dealing with something that wears her face like a mask." By then, it was too late. The Pickmans had already given the house what it wanted most, fear. As the investigations continued, Tony's condition worsened. The scratches came nightly, sometimes carving across his chest so deeply that they bled. He would wake gasping, thrashing, clawing at his own body in terror. Debra often tried to calm him, but nothing stopped the attacks. The physical marks were only part of it. The house seemed to sink its claws into his mind. Tony became restless, unable to sleep, pacing the halls late at night as though he was being watched. His temper grew short, and arguments flared between him and Debra over the smallest things. Friends noticed his demeanor shift. The once easygoing young man now carried a sharp edge, as if something followed him everywhere. Debra still believed Sallie was a lonely spirit, curious about her and protective of their baby. But Tony couldn't shake the feeling that what he faced was far from innocent. At times, he claimed he felt a rage inside the house, not his own, but flowing into him, like an infection of the spirit. One night, while sitting alone in the living room, Tony described feeling a wave of hatred so powerful it nearly drove him to violence. He had to leave the house and walk the streets just to regain control of himself. He later confessed to Debra that he feared whatever lived in the Sallie house wasn't just hurting him, it was trying to make him into something he wasn't. Investigators noticed the change too. During one session, Tony grew agitated without reason, his voice rising, his eyes narrowing with a glare that wasn't his own. A psychic pulled Debra aside afterward and said quietly, "He's being drained. The house wants him weak. And when he's weak enough, it will take him." The warning only deepened Debra's resolve to help, but it confirmed Tony's darkest suspicion: he wasn't just the victim of Sallie's games. He was the target of something that wanted to consume him entirely. And each day he stayed, he could feel himself slipping further into its grasp. By 1994, after nearly 2 years inside the Sallie house, the Pickmans were unraveling. Debra tried to keep the family together, but the constant attacks on Tony, the strange phenomena, and the oppressive atmosphere wore her down. Their once warm and hopeful home had become a battlefield. Tony's condition was the worst it had ever been. His arms and chest carried fresh scratches almost daily. He described a feeling of suffocation whenever he entered certain rooms. His dreams were filled with grotesque visions: a child's face that twisted into something monstrous, shadows that reached for him, laughter that turned into guttural growls. Debra had grown protective of their baby, refusing to let him sleep in his crib at times because she was afraid of what Sallie, or whatever was pretending to be Sallie, might do. More than once, she claimed to feel the crib shake as if unseen hands were rocking it. The breaking point came one evening when Tony was sitting in the living room. Without warning, he felt a searing pain across his stomach. Debra rushed in to see him lift his shirt, revealing long scratches forming across his skin in real time. She screamed, realizing the entity wasn't slowing down, it was escalating. That night, they decided they could no longer stay. They packed what they could and left, abandoning the house that had stolen their peace and nearly destroyed them. They never moved back in. The Pickman story spread quickly, becoming one of the most infamous hauntings in America. News crews, ghost hunters, and tourists soon descended on Atchison, eager to see the house that had broken a family. But for Tony and Debra, it wasn't just a story, it was a scar they carried with them long after they escaped. The Sallie house still stood, waiting for its next visitors. And though the Pickmans were gone, their ordeal had only deepened the mystery: what exactly lived inside those walls? More than a century has passed since Sallie is said to have taken her last breath inside that quiet little house. Families have come and gone, investigators have set up their cameras, skeptics have rolled their eyes, and thrill seekers have dared to walk its halls. But one truth remains: the Sallie house refuses to give up its secrets. The story of Sallie, the sick child who died at the hands of a desperate doctor, has become legend. Yet for all the stories told, no historical record has ever fully confirmed her existence. Was there truly a girl named Sallie? Or was the tale itself a mask, born from whispers and stitched together over time, making it the perfect cover for something much older and far darker? The Pickmans' experiences left scars that never healed. Tony still recalls the nights he woke with burning scratches, the suffocating weight pressing down on his chest, the vision of the little girl at the foot of his bed. Debra still believes a child's spirit lingered there, curious and longing for a mother's love. But even she admits there was more to the house, something shadowy, something hungry. Today, the Sallie House stands as both a tourist attraction and a warning. People step inside and laugh at the legends, until the air shifts, until a toy moves, until they hear their name whispered from nowhere. Some leave with proof in their cameras. Others leave with marks on their bodies. A few refuse to speak of what happened to them at all. And so the question remains, is the Sallie House truly haunted by the spirit of a child who never found peace? Or is it the playground of something darker, something that wears the mask of innocence to lure us closer? If you stood in the nursery, if you felt the air turn cold, if you saw her standing in the shadows, would you dare to stay?